I recently got tired of the lumber situation in my shop, so I made this lumber rack to solve all my issues. So today on Character Red Workshop, that's exactly what we're going to make, and I'm going to show you exactly how I did it. Before I even jumped into anything, I already have my base. It's going to be 2 feet by 6 feet. So I got my Craig multi-mark and I started to describe the layout that I wanted. I know that I'm going to have a shelving section, so I'm taking this time to carefully lay out exactly where the stock's going to be, and we're going to measure everything and get it drawn onto the base. That way there's no screwing it up. The next step that I took was measuring what would be my sides. So I knew that I wanted them to be 36 inches tall. That would give me plenty of room for some cutoffs or anything that I wanted to store. So I measured that and then I cut that stock down with my track saw. After getting the side panels cut down to length with the track saw, I moved over to the table saw to start working on the shelves. These shelves, plus the dados and the rabbets, are going to equal a total length of 1 foot. So I went back over, got my depth, and then I needed to head to the wood shop on base. After I got everything loaded up and I got over to the wood shop on base, I set up the dado stack and I utilized the Craig multi-mark again to check the depth. That way my rabbets and my dados are perfect with the stock that I have. Anytime that I'm cutting rabbets on the edge of a board, I like to put up a sacrificial fence. That way the table saw fence does not get damaged during this process and it makes for some clean rabbets. The next thing that I'm going to do is measure down 10 inches. And when I start my dados, I want to start each dado on the same side of the mark. That way your shelves have equal spacing. These clips also remind me to not set my camera on something that's going to be shaking all the time. But hey, if you like this video, please give me a thumbs up. Consider subscribing to my channel and get notified for all my upcoming videos. So once I'm back in the shop, I got my Masca M1 Pro pocket hole system out and I'm going to set that up for the stock that I need. That way I can cut a ton of pocket holes. After you get the depth set for your pocket hole system, I hook it up to my shop vac, and this helps preserve the bit. And not only that, but I don't have a huge mess in my shop to clean up after this process is all done, because we know it's very messy. Remember those shelves that we cut a little bit ago? Now it's time to start putting the side panels up and putting them up. And in order to get these side panels up and these shelves in, of course we're going to use wood glue. But a technique that I like to use is using some StarBond CA glue to set everything in place. That way you're not messing around with the glue up. And then you can set your pocket hole screws. Now that we've got the first side panel up, we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And using StarBond again reminds me, if you guys go to starbond.com and use code CRW15, you'll get 15% off of your order. I use this product all the time, and honestly, I consider it another tool in my shop. Now moving back into the build, I'm putting the top panel on after I've got all the shelves in, and I just reinforce these with a couple of screws. It's really not necessary because the rabbets are well strong enough. Next, I'm going to move into cutting down 2 sheets of 1/2 inch plywood down to the dimensions for the shelving units that I'm going to house most of my unmilled stock. Since I changed thickness on the stock that I'm using, I'm going to go ahead and reverse the settings back to a 1/2 inch stock, and then we're going to move into, yep, you guessed it, more pocket holes. Now that I've finished up this second round of this pocket hole frenzy, I'm going to set down my Capro magnetic square, and keep in mind, in the first couple of steps before I even got started, I scribed everything on how I wanted it to be already onto the base. So this square is just trying to keep everything aligned while I set the pocket hole screws with the wood glue. So after I get the first panel in and I moved into the second panel, I realized it's really tight and there's probably a better way to do it. So if you just think through it, I'm sure you can come up with something a little bit better. In all these shop builds that I do, my goal is ultimately to cut down the amount of materials that I use throughout the builds, but not sacrifice functionality or the looks of the project. In this portion of the build, I am marking off some offcuts that I had from this project because I wanted a little area in front to put just kind of random things on what I wanted, but I also wanted to change up the design a little bit from some projects that I've seen in the past. And that's ultimately the great thing about woodworking, is you can see something that somebody has already done and you can be creative and make it your own. And I would really advise you to do that. If something in this build doesn't work for you, don't put it in it. After I get done cutting the pieces for these dividers, I'm going to go into marking the layout for the angle that I need in order to make this thing look halfway decent. And I just zoomed in on that massive lumber stack because I actually tripped over my lumber, and it's the whole reason why I decided to make this lumber cart. It was really dangerous having all of this floating around in my shop with no home, and not to mention it looked terrible. I normally tack everything in place with 23 gauge pin nails before I go into countersinking everything and sinking the screws in. Of course, I'm using wood glue as well, but the 23 gauge pin nails just really make it so easy, and you don't really have to fight with things because it'll hold it in place. I might have forgot to mention that there is a ton of pocket holes in this thing. So make sure you have a good pocket hole jig on standby, because if you're going to make this, you're going to need one. For the dividers, I used offsetting pocket hole screws on each side to add a little bit more stability to it. And then, I just overkilled it and drilled some screws into the side just for safe measure. Looking back on this, I probably should have used a countersink on that. This portion with the palm router was actually one of the dangerous and most scary parts of the build. I probably shouldn't have been using it in this fashion, but as you can see, my router bit came unhinged from the collet, so I switched over to a flush trim saw and flush trimmed the rest. So I know what you're probably thinking to yourself. Why did he have to use the router and the flush trim bit in the first place? And the reason is, when I cut this down with my track saw, I decided to leave a little bit extra, and that one side was actually just a little bit too long, and I glued this thing up and totally didn't realize it. So You know, it's a rookie mistake and I probably shouldn't have made it. But in retrospect, it turned out just fine. After all, it's shop furniture. After getting this bad boy turned over on its wheels, I was so excited that I had to break out in a little dance and then get straight into putting all my lumber in my brand new lumber rack. And you can do the same. All you gotta do is set your mind to it and make this thing. Well, that's it for this build, guys. If you like this video, please give me a huge thumbs up, consider subscribing to my channel, and don't forget to stick around for the bloopers. See you guys on the next build.